Okay, shall we start? Thank you very much for coming to this session. Can I just check you can all hear us? Great. I'm Idile Murdoch. I'm one of the neonatal consultants in Edinburgh, and I've been the clinical lead on the Being Open and Adverse Event Improvement projects over the last few years. And this is Corinne Love, who is an obstetrician in Lothian, but she's also our SMO for maternal, let me get this right, maternity and women's health in Scottish Government. And she's been leading the national work on developing a framework for adverse event reviews. Okay, so this afternoon we'd like to just present some of the improvement work and the progress, and also give you an opportunity to ask questions and feedback some of your thoughts. Okay, so before we talk about the improvement approach that we're developing, we thought it'd be helpful for at your tables if we just have 5 minutes. And could you all think about whether you're, from your own health boards, whether you're able to describe your own adverse event review process? Are you able to describe the team who lead it, how it works? Do you know if families and staff are involved in reviews, and if they are, how that happens? Do you as staff members contribute to any of the reviews? Does the service learn and improve from the reviews? And just have a think about what's the culture around adverse event reviews in your service, and it would be helpful if you could maybe just all share your thoughts around that. We'll have 5 minutes on that. Okay, could we ask you just to start pulling that together? And if we could just, we'll ask each of the tables, if you could just give us a sort of one-sentence theme of what your table was thinking. Could we start over there on your table?
Hello. We all agree that we all submit DTEXs. We think the culture's changed dramatically, that staff are willing to do. They understand the relevance of near miss and whether it's an event that's with harm or without harm. And from our perspective, we review them monthly and we send out a newsletter. There's learning and there's action from that as well. I do lots of reflection with staff who are directly involved, and we look at themes from that to progress with our improvement methodology. So, yeah. Anything else?
We have a very structured process. Moving forward, what we want to look at is staff support and learning from excellence.
Likewise, we've got quite a structured process in Highland and an SER toolkit that we work to, and clinical governance team oversee that. But one of the things I probably feel, having just recently been through an SER, is actually, are we giving enough support to the professionals involved when they actually come to the SER? It seems that obstetricians and midwives are quite stressed and anxious when they're actually coming to an SER, so when they're putting in statements. And, I would like to think that it isn't a culture of blame, but I think there's still that, from staff, there's that feeling that that's what's going to happen.
We have a evolving process, and although the process is there, we are looking to improve. What we find is challenging is how to share the learning from the process and how to share the finding from the process with the families.
Okay, thank you very much for that sorry.
So I think we recognise we've got a good structured process around it. that we try really hard to be consistent around involving staff and families, but there's still things to learn and evolve in, much like you've just said. And again, I think it's about the learning and how do we get that back into practice.
Could I just say as well, as a former MCN lead, one of the things I've been asked to do on a few occasions, being asked for feedback to some of the units that Aberdeen care for, and we have set up cross-board M&M meetings to facilitate that, but it's quite difficult when the request for feedback comes through emails and supporting the staff that don't work in the unit that you work in.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much for that. And it's encouraging to hear that people are feeling they're developing structured processes, but I think we all know the challenges involving staff and families and supporting them through all of that. I want to share this story at the beginning. Corinne and I drove in today, and I was driving into the car park, and we both felt we'd had the best car parking experience I've ever had. Honestly, and we were talking about it as we parked the car. And I thought, why was that so incredible? We drove in, a very nice man met us, gave us a sticker, gave us very clear instructions about how to park. And I remember him saying to me, you must reverse park. And I thought, that's a bit specific. But anyway, I remember that. Drove on in, and then another car parking man met us and was very pleasant, had a little chat and said, yes, turn right. Then I didn't quite get the last bit right. I went too far, but there was another man to stop me and say, go back. And he reminded me I had to reverse park. So we reverse parked. And I thought that was an amazing car parking experience. There were loads of people to help us. They were very nice to us. And they managed, I went back and took a photo of the car park. They managed, everybody has reverse parked. So I was thinking about that. I thought, that's a great example of a really complicated process that was delivered efficiently, and they made the users feel very happy. So that's our analogy of what we're trying to achieve. With adverse events involving families and staff. But actually, seriously, if you think about any of our complex processes at work, complex areas of delivery, think about something that works very well in your service. And something that works very well and works well all the time will have a lot of infrastructure beneath it. It'll have an SOP, it'll probably have guidelines, a policy, some workforce and some training, and somewhere in the system it's being monitored. And it's interesting in maternity because our services achieve lots of complex things, and we also are very familiar with having difficult and challenging conversations. So it's interesting in a way why all these reports, Embrace, Each Baby Counts, PMRT, say that our services, we're not great at reviews and we're not great at involving families. So it's interesting, isn't it, for a service that's quite comfortable in other settings with that. So with the improvement work, we've really had to break down why it is we're not achieving it. And I think the first step, going back to the car parking, you need to have a framework. You need an overall structure. Somebody must have, for the Murrayfield staff here, must have an overall approach to the car parking here. And that's where they started with it. So Corinne's going to explain how her work around developing this framework has been so important.
Thank you. So I think I've spoken about this several times in several different forums, so I'm just going to take 5 minutes just to recap on where we are with it at the moment, and for anybody who hasn't heard about it, just to give a flavour of what's happening around this. And so, as Edilie has said, in an attempt to develop a reliable, robust process. And I came to this as the chair of the Scottish Stillbirth Group, because we were looking for other initiatives around what we could do to try and further improve the great work that we've done in Scotland around stillbirth. And we thought, well, what we need are common themes. We need to know what our common themes across Scotland are. We know what they are across the UK, but are they different in Scotland? And so we wrote out to all health boards to say, you know, what are you doing and how are you doing it? And as we've heard, and you know, from everybody around the tables, that everybody's doing reviews. They are all doing them, but everybody's doing something slightly different. We have 14 different versions of this. And that's confusing. It's confusing for families. It's a small country. Families all talk to each other, and they know that there are 14 different versions of this, and they're all called something slightly different. And it's confusing for staff as well. So then kind of thought, well, could we bring this together? Could we develop, you know, a national framework that we are all using, that we all call the same thing? And you know, is this possible? And it does seem to be possible. This is version 20. But we are getting there. Where's the clicker? And in terms of how we have got there, it's been a lot of work. It's taken about 18 months, and these are all the groups who have been involved and who have had input. And the thing that I like about this is that, you know, it absolutely has been co-produced, but it's been co-produced from bottom up. This is not a top-down approach. This is a bottom-up approach. You know, we've had government and Healthcare Improvement Scotland have been involved. We've had the third sector involved. I put SANS there, but Bliss have been involved as well. The MCNs, the heads of midwifery, you know, all sorts who have been involved in developing this version 20 that we're at the moment. And you know, we came up with a number of principles that we wanted to work towards, and you know, how were we going to achieve those principles in terms of what would underpin these principles, and things like the terminology that we use. You know, what does a multidisciplinary group look like? Have a minimum quota for what we would say that would involve across Scotland. You know, minimum requirement of cases that automatically go to SAER. Just it's not an absolute, but let's have a minimum that we are all working towards. And so these are the principles. I'm not going to read them out there because, you know, it's a lot of what everybody has said already, but, you know, this document includes all of these things. And this is the flowchart in that document, which is the minimum requirement of events that will automatically go to SAER. And this aligns with the UK programmes that are ongoing at the moment around Embrace and Each Baby Counts. It does incorporate what's happening around the PMRT as well, because these all need to align. It also aligns with his national framework for adverse events. The thing about that framework is that it's very generic. It's not specific to maternity, and what this does is actually operationalises how we're going to do that for maternity and neonatal services, which is what people are struggling with. Everybody knows it's a great idea, but how do you do it? What do you do and how do you do it? And so that's what we've tried to do. And this has been is being piloted currently in Ayrshire and Arran, and we're going to hear a little bit later from Jill Irvin from Ayrshire, who's here, just going to give us a bit of a flavour of how that's gone, and it's about to start being piloted in Fife as well. And once we have results back from the pilots, we'll just amend the draft slightly and hopefully look to be rolling this out across Scotland later this year. So.
Okay, so we have a framework. Then there's the next step is how do we embed that? How do we take a framework into a service and make sure our reviews are happening in this way and we're involving families and staff consistently? Apologies for the crowding of the words there. So this is just a summary of the improvement approach we took. We worked with a team that included a psychologist and an expert in communications training and members of our quality improvement team. We followed the QI methodology, but we had two additions, and that's around the first step, listening, and the simulation, which I'll come to later. And we thought about the best way to go about embedding this framework. And one of the reasons we included the stages of listening and simulation was we kind of realised maybe one of the reasons we've found it difficult to achieve this in maternity services is because a very difficult event has happened, and families therefore have an emotional and psychological response to that, which is a normal response, but nevertheless it's a difficult response. Staff also we'll have our own emotional and psychological response as well to the trauma, to the difficult event. And it's difficult, therefore it's a challenge to try and communicate clearly and sensitively in that context, particularly in a context where the families may feel, and often do feel, that we have caused it or we have to blame for it. So it's different to maybe accompanying a family through a complex time. For example, if a baby's having palliative care, is very different to a communication where there has been a very unexpected neonatal death. And so what the team helped us realise is if that's the reason why we're finding it hard to have these conversations, we need to think about how we support staff to be able to have these emotionally and psychologically responsive conversations with families. So as part of that, we spent an awful lot of time listening to staff. Several groups of staff were broken down into their different groups. We listened to what their perceptions are of their SAER process or involving families and staff. It was very open listening, and they were analysed. Oh dear, everything's they were analysed in terms of themes, and these are examples of the themes that came out from Lothian, and I'm sure they will be similar to elsewhere. Can you read them? So those are quotes from staff, and the issues were around delays, a blame culture, delays in sharing the report, not understanding the SAER, not feeling involved, and very poor continuity. And it was from those themes that helped us work out what we needed to do to implement the framework. The second part of the methodology that we added was this simulation training, because we realised it's very difficult to ask staff to practice these conversations until they're confident. And we can't practice them when a family's had an adverse event. So we had to find a way of allowing staff to practice those conversations in a simulated scenario with a simulated patient. So that means it's much easier for us to try out different ways of having those conversations in a supported way. So we developed some simulation training around a scenario, which takes the team, about 10 or 12 members of the team, as would happen on for example, a labour ward or neonatal unit, a midwife, neonatal nurse, anaesthetist, obstetrician. And we supported the staff and listened to the staff in terms of how to have these conversations. This is some of the feedback, just to illustrate that the training had a beneficial effect, because it made the team feel that they understood each other more, and they realised that everybody finds it hard having these conversations. So it had a positive effect on our team building. From the information feedback from the simulation training, from the listening, from the process mapping and this framework, this is really a summary of the integrated SAER and communication process that we've developed and that we are piloting. It's a 6-point communication process, and it starts, the first point is when the adverse event occurs. Number 6 is when the family finally get the report. The first 4 points will occur before the family are discharged from the hospital, and 5 and 6 are the weeks to months until the SAER is completed. I won't go into all the detail now, but behind each of these columns we have detail on the goals of the communication, who is the best ideal member of staff to deliver it, and what to say. We've got a guide now that is a collection of all the helpful conversations and sentences and approaches you can use at each of these time points. We've got information on the ideal time, and then also the form, so whether it's a face-to-face meeting, an email, or a letter. So this is the process that we're trying to integrate and embed. And from the improvement theory, you'll know that to embed improvement, we need to have a way of recording the data and monitoring it. This is what we've done in Lothian, and we've developed this tracker. So it's a review process tracker for SAERs or PMRTs. And on the tracker are all the points of the SAER process that we need to achieve and all the communication points. And a small group of us look at this every week to see if we're on track. From that, there's part of this is trying to make sure that the SAER process is running on time, because that has to work before you start trying to communicate with families at key time points. This is an example of our chart that we use to monitor the days from an SAE to the time it's closed. Our health board asked for that to be 66 days. We've not got there yet. We're a bit lower down if you go to the end of 2018. So it's important to have that kind of surveillance on your SAER process. We're also now looking at Datex to see if we can record the communication time points on Datex. And that's just an example of the work we're doing at the moment. And then from that, you can generate run charts to actually monitor the communication. So this is the run chart that looks at points 2, 3, 5, and 6. And that's generated for each SAER. We started this in 2016, and you could see towards the end of 2016 we were hitting 100% reliability, and that has largely continued. It's not that it's dropped off, it's just that we haven't filled in that data towards the end. But these are just illustrations to show there actually is a way of monitoring or translating communication into data that can be monitored. Throughout the improvement programme, with the constant feedback from families and staff, there are other resources that have been developed. We use standard emails that can be sent to the primary and secondary care staff that look after a woman and her family, patient information leaflets, details particularly on the staff roles, and the one, sorry I didn't mention it on the full diagram, probably one of the main interventions that made the difference is the role of the key contact. So identifying somebody who will be the key contact for the family to liaise throughout the review process. And in our experience, the community midwife has been the most successful person to do that. So that's who we use in Lothian. We're trying that out in Ayrshire and Arran, and initial feedback is that is positive as well. So the key contact, the community midwife, if that's appropriate, is allocated before the family leave hospital, and they remain in touch with the family and will feedback any questions or thoughts that the family have that we need to acknowledge in the review. And this is the family. One of the other things we've developed is are family update letters. You'll know that these reviews can take longer than maybe planned. So there are a series of letters that our risk coordinator can send out to update the families, and they can be sent on email as well. And there's our communication guide. So this is sort of 3 years in now, and we continue to get feedback from staff and families. And this is some of the staff feedback now that is very different from that initial listening exercise. And you can see their comments around involving families. Again, the key contact role has had a very significant endorsement, teamwork. And I think this staff culture, we didn't really anticipate the change in culture and the wider sense of in the team about adverse events. We've also continued to follow the families up, and the 8 families that we initially worked with, we followed them up 3 years later, and it was incredible really to hear some of their responses, which you'll read here. Because what was coming back 3 years later, that there was a sense that they were able to move on, they were considering more pregnancies. One family actually had almost forgotten it and wasn't sure why our researcher was contacting them. So it was very encouraging, I think, for the staff and as an improvement project to see that this approach can have lasting effects. Just from our department, we often use this slide just to summarise the 2012 and then to 2018. There really has been quite a significant change. It's not perfect, and there's lots more to do. But certainly, there's, I think, been a shift in the sense of blame. There's an emphasis on systems and services rather than individuals. We now have families involved reliably, and there's a sense that families trust the service an awful lot more than they did. And this is this cultural change that this approach has resulted in. One of the reasons we were asked to pilot is to see if what we found was what we'd find in other health boards, and therefore could it be scaled up. So this is just a summary again, and I've just put in blue broadly what we've found appears to be standardised, and early feedback from Ayrshire and Arran is we're finding these similar points are being repeated. This is what we were asked to do. Healthcare Improvement Scotland initially funded the pilot, and I think it does feel that we're on the way to doing that, and the work with Ayrshire and Arran has been fantastic, and particularly getting a sense that it does seem to be something we can scale. And Jill Irving has very kindly, she's the clinical director at Ayrshire and Arran, and I only asked her yesterday, and I said, would you maybe just share some initial thoughts about the work?
Thanks, Italy. As I said, I'm Jill Irvin from NHS Ayrshire. Ayrshire's probably come synonymous with adverse event reviews. We'd already done a lot of work on improving our processes, and we're very keen to engage with the team from Lothian in a way of sort of standardising the approach, because that helps families and also staff as well. Sometimes we forget that staff are involved by a sort of ripple effect in these adverse reviews. As part of the preparation for involvement with the Being Open, a group of us went on the EC4H, I think you referred to it in one of your slides. We went on that course, and that was very good. There were people from various backgrounds, doctors, nurses, managers, talking about doing role play and how to use that role play to take back to your team, to use in certain events. It was quite generic. We were given a handbook as to, this is what you should say, this is what you shouldn't say. And it was all very good, but I sort of thought, if I'm actually in the place talking to a family, that's actually going to put more stress on me, because I'm very wary of what I'm saying, and now I'm also having to think about what page of the handbook I should be referring to. And it wasn't really until we got to, I think, October, when we had the first of the workshops, that I had a light bulb moment, and I thought, well, this is how it's going to work for us. Prior to that, we'd done the scoping, and we talked a lot about it and understood it in the theory, but that was when it really came together that this is how we're going to benefit. It's using scenarios that are relevant to yourself, and it's within your own team as well. So these are scenarios that you've been in, or you may very well be in, and your team training. It's a bit like Prompt, where you have that team building effect. So now the other thing that I like about it is it breaks it down into small steps. So as a consultant, when I'm coming in to see a family, I don't have to think about the enormity of what they're going for. I just have to think of that little chunk that we're at this particular time. I know that if I'm maybe going in to talk to them about the SAR process, I know that other people have talked about the other bits, and it just makes it much more manageable. I think we've learnt from it so far. What we've learnt is that it is quite emotional sitting through these workshops, because people are taken back to times that they've had in the past, And that was one very early piece of learning, that you can't expect somebody to come to the workshop and then go and work in the labour ward immediately afterwards. But I think it's because the workshops are so emotional, it means that when you're in that emotional place with a patient, it's much easier to access that learning and to be able to do it much more intuitively. So far, I think our results have been very positive. We're in the very early stage. We're at the minute trying to get a critical mass of staff trained in the technique, and we're in the process of what we described yesterday as carpet bombing, and just trying to get as many staff through the training as possible so that we can then take that forward without as much support from Lothian. So I would certainly recommend this approach. I think it's because it's so emotional and invested in your own unit, using real life scenarios, that's what works for me. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jill, for that. And I think we ended on you on that note. So, yeah, so we wanted to end there because we thought there might be questions. So, are there questions? Should I give you? Is there a roving one?
My question was just around about your community midwives acting as your kind of dedicated person for contact. If they're transferring or discharging women round about 10 days, do they maintain that contact? I find quite regularly the families come back with questions 4, 5, 6 weeks later. So I just wondered.
Yes, you're right. So the arrangement is they will continue to keep in contact, but simply around the liaison of the review, so that not around about clinical care. So we probably keep in touch till about 3 weeks' time, when we try and get the final questions in by around 3 weeks, so that we can make sure they're part of the review. And then the next point would be, once the review is completed, the community midwife will contact the family and have a discussion about whether they want to have the report or come in for a meeting, and whether they want the community midwife to be at the meeting.
Hi, Ellie. I'm just wondering how you've got on getting externals to come on your reviews, and have you used any technologies to help you with that?
So we're not quite so ahead with the externals, but so what we've tried to do as some small steps, because we've got 2 maternity sites, we try and use consultants from the Royal and St John's. So that's one opportunity to get externals. We have started to do some more cross health board SAEs, and we've used VC for that. We've done 2 or 3, and that will automatically provide externals. We are trying to pilot with GG&C whether we could set up some joint panels and do some cases from each health board. So that's where we've got with that, but there's more to go for that. But Corinne.
Yeah, I was just going to say, external input is one of the big things that, sort of training, how we share learning, and external input have been the kind of 3 big things from developing a national process, but that still need to be bottomed out. And definitely, I guess we're just trying different ways of doing the external input, and the suggestion has been that it should be external to the board. That could be an industry in itself, and everybody has a day job, and we just need to think quite carefully about how we can do that, how we can manage that, how we can report on that. So I don't have an answer at the minute, but it certainly is one of the big things that we do need to think of, have a reliable process for.
I think it's also good in your own unit, so to see what you can do, because we've asked chairs from other specialties to chair, or, and we've definitely moved away from no staff are involved in the review are on the panel. So that's one step you can move to, use other people from other specialties.
I'm from NHS Grampian. What we are doing is collaborating with NHS Highlands.
Okay. Yeah.
And that is like cross health board, and we can review each other cases. It has not started yet, but that is the plan.
Oh, great. Any more questions? Any other? I think we're
probably time for coffee if we've got more questions.
Thank you very
Okay,
much.
thank you.
Thank you.